Hello, welcome to another Housing Sector podcast. Today I'm with Dan Bruce. Dan, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. You've got a long story and a bit of background to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to just dive in and tell you all about it?
Yeah, let's start because you're quite an activist, aren't you, at the moment?
I am, and it's because it's the only real way to make progress. The legal system doesn't support home owners, leaseholders, home buyers, and neither does the political system. Like we've been, our MP is Sir Keir Starmer, and we've been wholly let down by him as well. And so the only real option I've had is to become an activist, and that's at the opportunity cost of career and business and family. And so, yeah, it's been a real cost, but it's something I've got to do.
I'm in exactly the same boat. We started out as a simple complaint, back in 2016, and yeah, there's no support, and we've given up on ours. Is our MP's Annalise Dobbs, and there's no support there, and the mechanisms in place, such as, okay, you go through the complaint process, then you go to the housing ombudsman. Well, that's it. They haven't driven any successful change. So we seem stuck in the same boat. How did you initially start out?
Well, I mean, I'll take you back to the beginning. So, at the end of 2018, I was incredibly fortunate. I sold a business that a friend and I started to Santander Bank. And as a result of that, I was able to afford what I thought was a luxury apartment in North London in Camden. And I moved in, I completed in March 2019, and my next door neighbor, Alex, completed a few days before March 2019. But I didn't move in for a couple of months afterwards. And as I was moving in and all my furniture was arriving, I bumped into Alex, and she basically told me how she'd had a nightmare since day one. Her terrace had been leaking into her bedroom and her daughter's bedroom, while her daughter was in the middle of doing her A levels. And I don't know whether I took her seriously at first, but I did the minute I opened my front door. And so this is my first day in the property, and there's clear signs of water ingress, which is where it all started. We started to complain about water ingress through our terraces and through the main building roof. And so we just put in structural warranty claims, and we thought that would be that. We've got this 10-year latent defect policy. They'll come in and resolve everything. But it was as they started to take my terrace apart, which took me about a year to get them to do, because there was a lot of back and forth and fighting and not really wanting to progress the claims on the behalf of the warranty provider. As they started to take it apart, the developers started to question, well, how's this building been put together? There were signs where joists were just left hanging, where joists had been attached to other joists, and so they stopped because they wanted to get an understanding of how the property had been built. And so essentially I was left with a completely open terrace and a tarpaulin over it for another year, whilst they tried to track down what had been built. And as this was happening, cracks started to appear in the facade of the building, starting from the top, and they've slowly worked their way down towards the foundations. And so I guess that's a long way of telling you how did I get started in this. I got started in this because I unfortunately ended up in a new build property that's dangerously defective, and have been unable to claim against my warranty to resolve what should have really been, in a fair world, a simple consumer rights issue.
So it's a new build. You move in. You think you've got all these rights protecting you. Who was the first person that you contacted to say, look, we've got water coming in, etc.?
Well, obviously, the first person would be the developer, and in our case, the developer also happens to be the freeholder. Um, and this is where you start to understand the phases of lawfare. And so the first response from anybody involved is, "Oh no, you're overplaying it. There's not a big problem here. This is a snag."
Mhm.
Um, I didn't believe them, and so I then started to claim against my warranty policy, or try to claim against my warranty policy. And their position is, "Oh, it can't be as bad as it seems. Oh, this is a developer problem. This isn't our problem." And so you end up stuck between a fight between the developer and the warranty provider. And in some aspects, that's correct. Like, it should be a problem between the developer and the warranty provider.
Yeah.
But at the point you've moved into a new build with clearly significant defects, you should be extricated from that process. Like the problem, it shouldn't just be a fight between the warranty provider and the developer. It should just be completely their problem. I should have had my money back at that point, in my view.
And how many people live in the is it a block of flats?
It's a block of 7 flats, of which 3 are owner occupiers and 1 is rented out. And the one that's rented out is not really in a fit state to be rented out. It's on the ground floor. So obviously, as water travels
Yeah.
downwards, it suffers the most. And then there's myself, my next door neighbour, and a downstairs neighbour. It's myself and my next door neighbour who've been kind of leading up both the legal and the activist fight.
So you've got nowhere with the developer and the warranty. That sounds like a hot potato that it's just been thrown around. No one's taking
It's
ownership.
much worse. It's much worse than that. So we've tried to claim against our warranty policy for 6 years now, and it's cost us about £400,000 in legal fees, and
Mhm.
that's only between 3 of us. Um, and what's happened is, like I mentioned, lawfare. So the first thing is to deny, and then eventually you prove to them that there's a real problem here. And that happened in our case in 2022, where a structural engineer who was provided by the loss adjuster, who was hired by the warranty provider, essentially concluded that the building's not fit for purpose and consideration should be given to demolition and rebuild. And so we broke through the denial phase, and then you move into there's some contractual obligations here, and there's bits that we don't necessarily agree with in the experts report, and all of a sudden they go from being an independent expert to this is your expert, so they've given you a favourable report. As I mentioned, they were recommended by the warranty provider, so it's about as independent as it can get, because if anything, they should be on the warranty provider's side. And so we ended up in the like squabbling over contracts and squabbling over what the real defects were and squabbling over what was covered under the policy. And eventually it came down to the warranty provider saying, oh, your limit of indemnity isn't what the policy says. And so we're in this fight now where we're claiming rightfully that we've got a limit of indemnity of £1 million per apartment, or the rebuild value of said apartment. And they're trying to bring in a part of the policy that doesn't apply to our situation. And so rather than us finding an amicable way to resolve this, the warranty provider is now taking us to court as defendants, and we're going to have to defend ourselves. And it gets even more crazy. If we lose, there's a chance we will be responsible for the warranty provider's costs. And so if you think of the timeline and you think of what's happened, all Alex and I did was buy new homes. We just wanted the safety and security of a new home.
Yeah.
And now we're going to be going to court and possibly facing bankruptcy if for some crazy reason we lose.
I just find it so hard to believe. It just beggars belief that in this modern society that we live in. Sorry, Dan, I'm struggling to get my head wrapped around this. How do you cope on a human level?
Um, Probably not very well. I'm definitely a different person to whom I was before this all happened. I'm much more timid, I'm more scared, I'm more anxious. But I've also got this really valuable skill set, and that is I just can't stop. And so I say it's a valuable skill set. It might also be a toxic skill set because it's causing me great personal, financial, and emotional harm. But I cannot live with the fact that even if we lose somehow, and I don't think we will, but even if we do lose somehow, I have to be able to look myself in the mirror and say,
Yeah,
you did everything. And
yeah.
so I guess my mentality is I would rather lose everything and know that I'd given everything than give up today.
Absolutely. And I stand with you on that one. I can't let this go. And people say, well, why don't you just let it go? Well, because it's my home. You know, it's my neighbours, it's other people, it's affecting all of us, and we need to take a stand on it. You've got quite a following on X that you've grown there. Are you finding that there are lots of people stuck in a similar situation?
Yeah, there's a lot. I suspect you know the answer to this, but there's a lot more than politics and the press would have you believe. This is much wider spread. What I've found is there's lots of people who will reach out and they are rightfully scared of making a noise or causing problems. And so, on one hand, I completely understand that. This is a really scary situation to be in. But on the other hand, it's made it much harder for those who've chosen to have a voice because we're quite frequently told, oh, it's not that big a problem, it's not happened to that many people. Whereas the reality is we know it is a big problem. We know it affects many more people than you'd believe from reading the newspapers and speaking to politicians.
I think the press, and we've seen that, you know, inside, even inside housing, you know, they're tied up with sponsorship deals, but they're also being threatened with lawsuits if they publish certain stories. And the mainstream media and local media itself here, they're also, if we publish that, there's a chance that we'll end up being taken to court ourselves, and they don't have the money to do it. And the mainstream media, it takes something like the post office scandal, you know, an ITV documentary for it to get anywhere.
Yeah, I've had stories spiked because of these slap orders.
Mm,
One specifically where, so the way our building was done is there was a developer and they subcontracted the work out to a third party, and this third party has been given planning permission to build 40 other properties across the country. And so I thought I've got to stop that, and I took
yeah.
it to the press and the story got spiked because he threatened to sue. And it wasn't that we were saying anything about the new properties. I was just giving an account of what had happened in ours. But it's a scary situation for journalists to be in as well.
It is. And for people that don't know, the slap there is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And it's something that I have been a victim of. And I was able to get it mentioned in the House of Commons because they're looking to bring in law that, you know, makes it illegal. However, the government seemed quite slow on putting in forward any recommendations for that. But it is a murky world, isn't it? And have you had any? I mean, I got arrested. My landlord sent the police round at 1:30 on a Sunday morning to say I'd been harassing them by sending them emails. Have you had anything like that?
We've not. I think I went. I think, and it's not by accident. I did something very smart. I think by going very public very early on, it has it's caused people not to try and treat me poorly in a public setting. Like obviously I'm being treated poorly as we go through the legal system, but I have found, so we did something that I thought might cause us grief, and that was we stopped paying our service charge because, as far as I'm concerned, there's no service due on like if anything, the
Mm.
developer, freeholder, owes me money. So we stopped paying our service charge, and as you know, they could have chosen to pursue forfeiture, but they didn't because I think they know they'd have lost because of the situation. And they seemed quite reasonable about it until I did a subject access request and realized there'd been quite a lot of vitriol sent back and forth between the developer and the managing agent about how this wasn't their fault and it was me being difficult and what can they do about it, and they concluded that there wasn't a lot they could do about it. So yeah, I think to answer your question, the types of people involved in this I think would have treated me badly if I hadn't gone so public very early on.
A subject access request again for those at home and those are thinking of using it. You're entitled to emails that have been written about you, and you can send that in. So it's subject any data that's held. That could be calls, CCTV, internal emails. And I was shocked at the way they discussed me quite openly. Um, and now they're very careful what they put in an email. And they quite often you see emails. Oh, we need to have a call about Mr. Jenkins. You know, you're free at 11, and of course that doesn't leave a paper trail for them to share.
Well, I've actually been trying to get access to my data from the Ministry of Housing level up, Levelling Up Communities and Government, I believe it's called now. It used to be DLUC. And I've been trying to get this data since 2024, April 2024. And so that's way over the amount of time I had to provide it. Eventually, they told me, oh, there's too much information to send. And so I pointed out that it wasn't disproportionate because I was in an existential battle here. And then they sent me over an A4 sheet of paper with like 10 sentences of why they're holding it. And so I explained, no, I want the actual data. I want anything about me. And they've recently just come back and said, well, that's not what you're entitled to under the GDPR. And it is. And so I'm now having to go back and explain to them that the GDPR rules, which I'm sure that MHCLG are fully aware of, I just don't think they want to give me the data. And my suspicion is there is probably things in there that aren't flattering.
Yeah. Never put anything in an email that
Even, even
you.
that's even that's a massive time sink. So everything about this is such a huge time sink. I've been fortunate in some respects that I have the resources to fight back. But up until from 2019 till early this year, this has been my full-time job doing this fight. And so my question that I would like to place to anybody in government or anybody who's pretending that will help us is, if this person who's fortunate enough to be able to fight back can't fight back, how is anybody else expected to be able to progress their problems, whether it be leasehold, whether it be defective new build, whether it be service charge related? How is anybody supported in this fight?
And the answer is we're not. I'm the kind of the other end of the spectrum in that we're a shared ownership, but in our block of flats there are people who are on housing benefits, and so we run the full gambit there. And you've got, I always say, you've got, single mums, you've got people looking after elderly parents and doing the school run. They don't have the time and inclination. I quit a reasonably good job to focus on this, and I now deliver for Sainsbury's in the evening, so I can do this during the day. And it's taken a huge toll on us. But and people always say to me, "Well, hang on a minute," and I'm going to put the question to you now, Dan. Hang on a minute. We have institutions in place. Have you been to the housing ombudsman? Have you been to the regulatory social housing? Where's your support? Have you been through all of these platforms?
It's a facade. So in our case, and so my case is straddles leasehold a bit, but is mainly to do with defective new builds. And the fact that you're protected as a purchaser of a new build is a facade.
Mm.
So who've I been to? So the developer, I can't hold accountable, but I need to A, realize my losses, and B, they don't have any money, so to speak. So I'm not going to succeed there.
Mm.
I've been to the company who signed off the building as compliant with building regs, which it obviously isn't. There's no culpability there. The local council is the only entity who could prosecute. I even had SECARE, which is the Construction Industry Council, and the Building Safety Regulator to look into the approved inspector. They didn't do a technical assessment. They came out with the preliminary findings that there was nobody of any structural qualifications involved in the sign-off of my building. But then when they reached their final assessment, they said that they could find no procedural failings in the sign-off of the building. So that's the developer, that's the approved inspector. The warranty provider, I've been trying to claim against my structural warranty. The first port of call was the Financial Ombudsman Service. And so I went to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and their remit is to intervene and put things right in a fair manner.
Yeah.
At this point, we spent about £200,000 in legal fees, so we're now at 400. And their conclusion, which would have breached, and so their conclusion, which would have breached all of the terms to do with any warranty and essentially, with any mortgage, was essentially, they have delayed the indemnification. Here's £500 in compensation. And so we refused that. Then we tried to go back to the Financial Ombudsman Service to resolve the latest point over the limit of indemnity. And just to be clear, my policy is explicit that in the first instance, complaints are raised with the warranty provider, and then in the second instance, they go to arbitration, so a single arbiter. And the arbiter that's listed in the policy is the Financial Ombudsman Service. So I again went to the Financial Ombudsman Service, which I'm terrified of doing now anyway. They're just not fit for purpose as an institution. I went to the Financial Ombudsman, so I raised my second complaint. Between the time period of raising my complaint, which is 6 weeks, and taking it to the Financial Ombudsman Service, the warranty provider brought court action. And so I raised this with the Financial Ombudsman Service. I says, look, they brought court action, but I brought my complaint before the court action was instigated. And the Financial Ombudsman Service position was, yeah, but we're not getting involved because there's now pending court action. And so I would like somebody to explain to me where in this process there is any protection.
It just doesn't exist, does it? And Labour are promising to build, what, 1.5 million homes, and it's going to be rushed through. Where do you see us in 10 years' time? When, I mean, yours is a reasonably new build. Where do we see it in 10 years' time when these houses have been thrown up and they're not fit for purpose and there's no one qualified to sign off on the structural?
Labour are creating the foundation of the next building safety crisis. There's no two ways about that. That's what's happening.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, you're doing quite well as an activist in getting lots of followers and lots of traction, which is great. And we have leaseholders, we have shared ownerships, we have cladding groups, we have, you know, grassroots people on the ground saying, I'm going to withhold my service charge. How do we unite us all? Because if we all come together, surely we become impossible to ignore.
It's a good question, and it's got a very subjective answer. And so I think what the message that needs to get out there is there are very few forms of housing that are fit for purpose today.
Mm.
And what I try to do, because I've got this analytical mind, is I try to take them all back to one root cause. And I think if you look at leasehold and you look at social housing and you look at other forms of housing, including new builds, at the very bottom of most of the disputes are the fact that these properties weren't built correctly. So service charges are sky high, sometimes because the managing agent is taking the mick, but a lot of the times it's to deal with latent or other defects that should have been the developer's problem. If you look at new builds, a lot of the problems stem from defects. If you look at social housing, a lot of the mold, the water ingress, the bad plumbing, the fact that these aren't safe environments for people to live, all comes back to the fact that they weren't built properly.
Mm.
And so I do think there has to be a huge focus on housing being fit for purpose. And for housing to be fit for purpose, it has to be well designed and well built in the first instance. And I think there should be a really big focus on the fact that the construction industry either can't or won't build safe, high quality homes under the current kind of regulations that they have to operate under.
Is this just a UK problem, or do we see it throughout Europe?
It's not. It's not just Europe. It's a US problem. It's kept fairly quiet, but Dubai is going to have a lot of problems with the fire safety to do with all the high rises they're throwing up. I think it's a global cultural problem in that people just want to throw up houses and they know that there's no culpability, so there's no incentive to build them correctly, which suggests that the industry perhaps attracts the wrong type of people. Because if you were to start a business today, your own business, you'd start a business that you're excited and that you are passionate about, and you'd be mortified if that business harmed customers or harmed somebody. And that's because you're a good person. Whereas if you look at sectors that are poorly or even completely unregulated, they attract people who think, oh, I can see a way to make money here. And they're not excited about building homes. They're not excited about giving customers this innovative home that's safe and comfortable. They're excited about making money. If they were really excited about innovative homes, one of the main builders in the north would, for example, would build amazing smart homes with amazing technology, and it would force another builder somewhere else in the country to step up their game and compete. But that's not what happens. They're building the same unsafe homes across the country. And so that suggests to me that it's cultural. And from what I know, we're seeing that same effect globally.
How do you feel when you see these housing associations at award ceremonies?
It's just they're just patting themselves on the back, aren't they? I
Yeah.
think any award ceremony. So let's not sugarcoat this. We live in a country that has demonstrably failed people in high rises. It's demonstrably failed people in social housing. It's demonstrably failed people buying new builds. What what does the industry have to celebrate?
Yeah. Do you know, I live in Oxford, and I see, and it's becoming more and more, once you see it, it becomes more and more noticeable. It's people living in vans. There are camper vans, and you get condensation build up on it when you slept in there in the night. And I'm driving around in my little Sainsbury's lorry, and I see that there are people living in vans because they can't afford to get a foot on the ladder. But then with yourself, you could afford to get a foot on a ladder, and it sounds to me like if you could go back in time, you'd rip up the check, walk away.
I would. Renting would have been a better option because I could have just said, nope, this isn't for me,
Yeah,
left and gone and figured it out. It takes me on to like a bit of another point. So when I sold my business, one of the things, like, not one of, the thing I am most proud of in my entire life is that the early employees who came into the business early, they worked really hard and we gave them some equity. They were able to buy their first homes. And so I've helped a load of people buy their first home, and touch wood, none of them have had any problems. And and at the same time, there was my co-founder, and I had some other friends who were in similar positions who'd sold their businesses. Every single one of them left the UK except for me. And I thought, you know what? No, like I want to pay my luck forward. I want to double down. I want to invest back into the UK. I want to invest back into London because London's been good for me. And it was the biggest mistake of my life. If I'd just chosen to go and live anywhere and not buy a new build, I'd have been in a much better position. If I'd gone to France, for example, and even bought a new build and it had been defective, they've got quite strong kind of rights over these sorts of things. So I'd have been protected. Um, yeah, I think what I'm realizing is the biggest mistake in my life wasn't perhaps buying this property. It was deciding to bet on the UK because the property is a symptom. The property is defective, and that happens everywhere. But the government had an opportunity to step in and save me and save you and save everybody in the building safety crisis. They chose not to.
yeah. And do you think if they'd chosen to, they wouldn't be able to build all the new homes that they need? So they're having to play the game.
I think so. It's a question of competence, isn't it? So
Yeah,
if they were to have viewed the housing sector or the country as a distressed asset, they'd have come in with two plans. One is this ideologic vision, which all political parties have, whether they're left, right, centre. And the other is a disaster response plan. And there's a really interesting book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And what it does is it says there's a big difference between what it calls a wartime CEO, so somebody looking after a company that's struggling, and a peacetime CEO, somebody who's looking after a company who's not struggling, it's doing brilliant, it's got no competitors. And a wartime CEO, which I see this government as what they should be doing, goes in and fixes the foundations and focuses on the real problems. And they can't really think about growth as a big overarching thing. And that sounds really bad for government not to think about growth, but it's also disingenuous to suggest that any growth at this stage is going to be healthy. And
yeah,
so I really do believe that they should have come in, fixed the foundation, and instead of saying we're going to do 1.5 million new homes, they could say, no, we're going to fix the foundation. We're going to do 750,000 new homes this session. but that's going to enable us to do 3 million in the next session. So they should have been looking towards a more long-term future. The 1.5 million homes is just a headline. They're never going to hit it because they're way off
Yeah.
track already. And worse, the further they get into the parliament, the more panicked they're going to be, and the more they're just going to allow people to throw up whatever it is they want to.
What would you be doing, Dan, if the house had been fine and you weren't now a housing activist?
My plan was for this to be the foundation of the next stage of my life. I wanted to build another business. I wanted to bring loads of investment into the UK. I wanted to kind of lead the charge for the UK becoming like a real startup ecosystem. And so what would I be doing now? Paying a lot more money in tax, employing a load more people who pay a lot more money in tax, and generally just being a net contributor to the economy rather than, I don't know what I describe myself as today.
No, no, I often struggle with that one. And it seems the amount of energy that we're having to put into something that just is right. You have to have a home that lives in, and if you don't have that, that stumbling block is, you need food, you need education, you need a house, you need a home, somewhere to rest your head.
Exactly, exactly. And so there was this guy on Question Time a while back, and he called the government economically illiterate, and like it was
Yeah,
amusing,
yeah,
and then it wasn't amusing because I realised it was true. And so if you think about, and again, like it's going to sound, I don't mean to just be talking about me. I'm using myself as an example to tell a story. But I've now spent, or myself and my neighbour have now spent somewhere in the region of £400,000 in legal fees. And part of those legal fees have gone to support a solicitor's company, like a law firm, and they've gone in tax to the government. And so that's like there's no multiple on that, and just it's coming straight from me and it's going straight to them. Whereas if I'd been able to take that £400,000 and invest in 10 startups, so seed invest in 10 startups, or seed invest in five and seed invest in my own, right? Just some combination. Some of those companies would have become successful. They would have grown from 2 employees to 10 employees to 50 employees. And so the money would have had a multiplier effect. And I think what we're seeing in the UK, our government doesn't understand that. They don't understand that they're talking about, oh, we're going to get BlackRock and they're going to invest in more houses and more this and more that. And that's fine, but that's par for the cause. You'll see a few percentage points growth every year. But the way you really bring growth to economy is you put money in the pockets of people who spend.
Mhm.
So me and you being able to go on an extra, I don't know, go for an extra meal out once in a while. And you put money into the things that are going to have a disproportional outcome on growth, such as startups. Look what happened to Silicon Valley through the 60s. Like it grew disproportionately quickly because there was mass innovation. The money multiplied. Our government don't understand that. And so they are economically illiterate because they're not providing the foundation for us to grow quickly. They're just doing more of the same. They're leaving people like you and I trapped where our money and our time and our expertise can't work.
Yeah. No, I agree. Look, we're coming to an end here, Dan. Look, stay strong and keep on the target. It sounds like you're already focused on that anyway, the same as myself. It shouldn't be this hard to say, look, the system's broken, we need to fix it. But whilst we've got so many people saying, no, 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 it's all fine, nothing to see here. Another awards ceremony, didn't we do great? But we need support of MPs and press. Everyone needs to admit that the system is broken.
But that's a really important point. So they do say it's fine, but my MP is the leader of the country.
Yeah.
I have overly briefed him. He knows it's not fine. In opposition, he was very clear to DLOC that we should be made whole, that we should be able to rely upon the warranty, and that our case is going to cause a lack of confidence in the new build market. He's been very clear about these things. It's just that now he's the one in power. He's distancing himself from those previous assurances.
Yeah.
And so for people to tell us it's fine, it's not a case of them believing it's fine. It's disingenuous. They know it's not fine, but they have to keep this facade up.
Yeah. Yeah. The Emperor's new clothes. All right, Dan.
is
Look,
what
let's catch up again in a few months and see what progress you've made, and we'll get some. I'll get some questions from other people who may be stuck in a similar situation or are looking for support because you've clearly done your
I'd
homework.
love to be able, yeah, I'd love to be able to help other people in this situation because it's untenable.
Yeah, perfect. Man after my own heart. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much indeed.